When we hear Greek myths, we usually think of a beautiful legacy left by the ancient Greeks. Stories full of romance and imagination, the way they explained the world as they saw it. But the deeper you go into Greek mythology, the more you notice something. The Greeks often understood the core of many processes, and they gave those ideas life through myth. Because myth is a genuinely beautiful way to pass a worldview across centuries to us, their descendants, instead of reducing everything to cold scientific statements. And yet, here's what's strange. Even with all the metaphor, all the romance, and sometimes outright fantasy, some things in these myths still look shockingly realistic. They even have specific names, and they have clear parallels in modern science and everyday life. For example, in the myths about Hephaestus, the god of the forge, there are actual robots. In those myths, they're called automatons. These automatons are described as intelligent, capable of complex tasks, and in some versions, they even have their own spirit, mind, and voice. This isn't presented as a miracle happened. It's stated very directly. There are creations given intelligence for specific jobs. There is a metal guardian that patrols a perimeter and protects territory. And there is a weak point, one critical spot, through which it can be shut down. And at some point, an uncomfortable question appears. Is this really just imagination? Where could the ancient Greeks have gotten such a clear idea of artificial assistance in a security machine? They lived long before factories, electricity, and robots. Today, we'll look at Hephaestus from exactly this angle. We'll see who inspired Elon Musk and plenty of other scientists to build modern robotic wonders. Let's start with the basics. Hephaestus is the god of the forge and metal. He's usually linked to fire, volcanoes, and craftsmanship. In mythology, Hephaestus is a top-tier master, someone who can spot the strengths of each god and create the perfect weapon, armor, item of power, and signature Olympic gear for them. The most famous examples are Zeus's lightning bolts, though there's a theory they were made together with the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires during the Titanomachy, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helm of darkness. But the imagination and knowledge of the Lord of the Forge didn't stop at weapons. Among his masterpieces, for example, are these well-known creations. Pandora, the first woman, shaped and formed by Hephaestus on Zeus's command. Hera's cursed throne, trap gift she gets stuck on. The fire-breathing bronze bulls of Aeëtes, Colchis, part of Jason's trial. The thrones of the gods on Olympus, Hephaestus as the designer and creator of thrones. The chains and bonds for Prometheus, in Aeschylus' tragedy, Hephaestus takes part in binding Prometheus. The golden chariot of Helios, the sun god, and of course, various automatons, basically the first AI placed into physical bodies and designed for different tasks. The origin story of the smartest god in myth is often brutal. Hera gives birth to a son on her own, without Zeus, out of jealousy, after the story of Athena. Zeus swallowed Athena's pregnant mother, Metis, because he feared being overthrown by Athena's brother. That brother never ended up being born. But later, Athena emerged from Zeus's head, by herself, unstoppable and triumphant. If you want the full story, we have a separate video about Athena on the channel. Hephaestus is an Olympian god. He has incredible power, but at the start of his path, he's an outcast. He's often described as unattractive. And because of that, Hera, ashamed of her son, throws him off Olympus. Hephaestus falls from a tremendous height, barely survives, and is left lame. After that, he ends up far from Olympus. Sea deities nurse him back to health. And later he grows up on the island of Lemnos among humans and learns the craft. That's where he forms, and where his divine potential begins to unfold. And when Hephaestus returns to the story of the gods, he does it in his own creative way. He makes a gift, almost like a sign of recognition, or even reconciliation with his mother. A golden throne, beautiful, worthy of a goddess. Hera sits down on the throne, and she can't stand up. It's a trap. And the gods realize that without Hephaestus, they can't fix the problem. They call him to Olympus. They demand. They negotiate. He ignores them. So they send Dionysus after him, a subtle psychological move. Dionysus is the easygoing guy in any group. Dionysus does what he does best. He gets Hephaestus drunk and brings him to Olympus, right on a mule. When Hephaestus comes to his senses, Zeus makes an offer. Free Hera, and you'll get a place on Olympus and full status. Hephaestus agrees, and from that moment he takes his rightful place in the pantheon and fully steps into his role as the chief smith of the gods, the one who makes almost everything Olympus uses, and even things Olympus never dreamed of before him. But today, we're not focusing on shields, swords, or scepters. We're focusing on something else. In the stories about Hephaestus, a theme appears: living creations. Things that today we would call robots. And the most famous example is his golden assistants. In descriptions of Hephaestus's palace, there are assistants made of gold. They look like girls, but the point isn't how they look. It's what they are. They move on their own. They carry out the forge god's spoken commands with precision. They run the household. And in some versions, they even help with research and study. They work beside him not only with their hands, but with creative intelligence as well. So we're not talking about statues made for decoration or a one-function robot vacuum. We're talking about something closer to a fully developed AI-like being in a physical body with an autonomous system. And this is where it gets most interesting. Because if you remove the word myth, what remains is a very modern idea. An artificial assistant working alongside a person. Well, in our case, alongside a god. And this is not the only example of such creations. Many others are mentioned and described. Sometimes they're objects that seem able to move by themselves. Sometimes they're security machines or openly warlike automatons. Yes, the ancient texts don't explain what gears are inside or how exactly it works. But the idea repeats. Hephaestus doesn't make just an object. He makes what today we would call a robot. Now the second part, the most robotic story of them all. Talos. Talos is the bronze guardian of Crete. He's described as a massive bronze being that protects the island. He checks the perimeter and responds to threats. Talos doesn't live in a human sense. He doesn't need food, drink, recharging. Sleep doesn't matter to him. And Talos has enormous physical strength. And combined with a bronze body, he's basically the perfect ancient weapon. A prototype of the universal soldier. Talos can throw rocks from the shore at ships from hundreds of meters away without effort. And he can also heat up, becoming red hot and deadly to approach. Honestly, that's a ready-made Marvel plot, but what matters is that Talos has autonomous consciousness, specific tasks, and consistent behavior. And there's one more detail that makes Talos feel especially close to a modern robot. He has a weak point. Different versions describe it differently, but the meaning is the same. There is one critical spot, like a bolt or a vein. And if that spot is damaged, Talos shuts down. Basically, an on-off switch. That's why Talos still grabs people's attention today. He isn't described like a demon or vague magic. He's described like advanced technology. Now the main question, how could the Greeks have come up with all these details? Think about it. One thing is to assign gods the powers of natural forces, forces the ancients could observe directly. But it's a completely different thing to describe something that looks like a modern humanoid robot. Thousands of years before, even the first bulky computer appeared in the United States in the fall of 1945. Were these really just myths? Who knows? On one hand, what we've described is shocking in how closely it matches modern robotics. On the other hand, no real remains of Talos have ever been found, at least not that we know. Now briefly, why did Hephaestus end up at the center of this theme? Because in myth, he's the one who invents. He's credited with creating things for gods, heroes, and humans. If someone needs something special, Hephaestus almost always shows up and delivers a solution no one has seen before. He makes Pandora on Zeus's command. He makes the trap net that catches Aphrodite and Ares. He makes prehistoric AI robots. And if we try to identify Hephaestus as accurately as possible, he's the mythological, brilliant, hardworking author of technology. Now let's move to our time. When people hear robots and the future, many think of Elon Musk, Tesla, Optimus, and the whole conversation about whether robots will work alongside humans. And to put it plainly, Hephaestus set the example and Musk picked up the same idea in the modern world. Only Hephaestus has a forge and a hammer, officially, and Musk has engineers, projects, and resources. Maybe one of you, dear viewers, will ask Musk on Twitter whether he borrowed a few concepts from Hephaestus. If you enjoy this kind of content, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Sisters before misters, let's